This hunt is our last chance, or our ruin. Elder Yakuta's voice, broken by age but firm as permafrost, echoed in the vast desolation at 71 degrees as the shadow of 900 hungry eyes emerged from the ice fog. The ground trembled beneath her fur boots, not from the cold, but from the silent approach of a horde of ravenous predators. She tightened her grip on her rifle, feeling the weight of the village on her fragile shoulders and the deadly cold that penetrated to her bones. What she would do now, alone, against a tide of wild beasts, would define the fate of all. And what she discovered about her own resilience would forever change the legend of the tundra. Elder Lena felt the icy air cut at her throat. But the tremor in her hands was not solely from the cold. It was the weight of that vision, the brutal and overwhelming reality materializing before her experienced eyes. 900 leopards. The number echoed in her mind. Absurd, impossible, yet there they were, slender, hungry silhouettes moving like a dark river in the mist. Her eyes, accustomed to deciphering the secrets of the vast tundra, now saw only the immensity of the threat. A heavy sigh escaped her chapped lips, instantly transforming into a cloud of vapor. She tightened her grip on the rifle even more, the cold stock against her wrinkled cheek. It wasn't fear that paralyzed her, but the magnitude of the challenge. How could a single woman, even with the wisdom of 80 winters, face such a horde? The village, so dependent on her, so skeptical of her departure, now seemed a distant dream, a warmth she desperately needed to protect. Lena remembered the faces of the younger ones, the doubtful glances when she announced her solitary departure. "The elder is too old," they whispered. "She won't find anything where the strongest hunters have failed." Those whispers, once a burden, became a silent fuel in her chest. She could not fail, not now. The scent of the tundra, normally a familiar balm, was now impregnated with the wild odor of predators. Lena raised her head, her eyes scanning the landscape. The ice stretched infinitely, dotted with twisted bushes and thick snow-covered rocks. Every step those leopards took was a warning, a reminder of the hunger that drove them. They weren't there by chance. The scarcity of game had pushed them into human territory, transforming them into a force of nature as relentless as winter. Lena knew that direct confrontation was suicide. Her old rifle, a faithful companion of so many hunts, was a drop in the ocean against 900 beasts. Cunning and deep ancestral knowledge of the land would be her only weapons. She needed to understand the horde's movement, its patterns, its weaknesses. Decades living in harmony and, at times, in confrontation with the wild nature of Yakutia had taught her that even the most overwhelming force had a vulnerable point. It required patience, observation, and a courage that transcended fear. With slow, calculated movements, Lena retreated, blending into the grey landscape. Her eyes never left the dark mass of leopards. She needed distance to think and strategize. The plan would not be about shooting each of them, but about disorienting them, dispersing them, leading them away from the village, and at the same time, finding the game that would ensure her people's survival. The task was monumental, but Lena's heart, forged by endless winters and countless challenges, refused to yield. She moved like a shadow, every muscle of her aged body responding with surprising precision. The icy wind whipped at her face, but she barely felt it. Her mind was ablaze, analyzing the air currents, the snow formations, the distant sounds the wind carried. The village depended on her, a certainty warmer than any fire. Lena knew that the first step was attentive observation, reading the tundra like an open book. And so, with the horde on her heels, she began to map her path, not to flee, but to fight. Elder Lena, with controlled breathing, found temporary refuge behind a mound of hardened snow. She observed the leopard horde intently, her experienced eyes discerning patterns in the dark mass that covered the vast tundra. She realized that, despite their overwhelming number, hunger drove them, making them less cohesive. Small groups separated, a sign that perfect coordination was a luxury that scarcity did not allow. The wind, her old confidant, whispered secrets about the gusts, vital information for survival. Lena felt the cold, but her mind was immersed in the deadly dance between predator and prey, which she had known since childhood. Every shadow, every muffled sound in the snow was a crucial piece of the puzzle. The village, with its distant smoke plumes, was the beacon guiding her thoughts and courage. She remembered stories told by her grandmother about how the ancient Yakutians used the tundra itself as an ally. It wasn't about fighting brute force, but redirecting it, using knowledge of the elements to create a decisive advantage. An almost imperceptible smile touched her chapped lips. The young ones, with their haste and faith in rifles, had forgotten ancestral wisdom. They saw impossibility. Lena saw the cracks, the fissures in the insurmountable wall of icy adversity. Her plan began to take shape, subtle as ice. It would not be a battle of gunfire, but of deception and disorientation. She would need time, patience, and traps that wouldn't harm the animals, but would lead them away from the village, to a place where game was more abundant and they could disperse naturally. The idea was not to eliminate the threat, but to manage it, to coexist. Respect for life, even that of predators, was a fundamental pillar of her culture and her own resilient soul. Lena reached out and touched the snow, feeling its cold texture. She thought of the hidden paths, the depressions and elevations carved by the wind, the points where the ice was thinnest. Every detail of the landscape was a vital piece on her chessboard against the hungry horde. She would need lures, sounds, scents to divert the leopards' attention, guiding them away from the village's human scent trail. It was a master's game, and Lena, with her age and vast experience, was the most cunning and prepared player. Her heart beat strongly, not from fear but from renewed energy, from a silent certainty. She was not just a fragile elder, she was the guardian of a millennial legacy, the personification of her people's resilience. With a deep sigh, exhaling the weariness of 80 winters and inhaling the strength of the tundra, Lena began to move again. Not to retreat, but to advance, to plant the first seed of her ingenious plan. An almost invisible trail in the snow, the beginning of her beloved village's salvation. Her agile fingers manipulated small branches and stones, preparing the first of the subtle traps the premise mentioned. Hope, once a small brazier, now burned with a constant and vibrant flame in her chest, warming her against the relentless cold of Yakutia. She knew that every movement counted, every decision would shape everyone's future. Lena, with agility that belied her age, began to work with fervor. These were not crude traps, but an ingenious series of markers and diversions. With her gloved and sensitive fingers, she gathered dry branches, sticking them strategically in the snow. Not in a straight line, but in a pattern that would seem random to an untrained eye. However, for the leopards, guided by instinct and keen scent, each branch would be a subtle reference point, an invisible barrier that would guide them away from the village. She used dark stones, warmed in her hands, to create small mounds that altered the wind flow and the village's scent. Her face, weather-beaten by 80 winters, was concentrated, her lips murmuring softly, as if conversing with the tundra itself. "Patience, my children," she whispered, imagining the leopards. "There is food for all, but not here." She thought of her grandchildren's faces, the hopeful eyes of her daughter-in-law, who watched her leave with apprehension and faith. This faith propelled her through every painful movement of her joints. The cold was constant, but the urgency in her heart was a potent warmth. The leopard horde, still distant, stained the horizon with its presence. The heavy air carried the omen of hunger, a constant reminder of the imminent threat. Lena could feel the vibration of their steps on the frozen ground, a hum in her bones. She knew she had little time. Every subtle trap, every diversion had to be perfect, convincing. She could not afford a single mistake. The life of her village depended on the precision of her hands and clarity of mind. She knelt, feeling the damp snow on her fur trousers, and with her machete scraped away the ice, exposing the dark, cold earth. In some spots, she scattered dry moss and herbs she carried with her, with a strong and unusual scent for predators. With her fingertips, she spread the odors, confident that nature would respond to her subtle manipulation. Her goal was to create a trail of distraction, an olfactory labyrinth to lead them away from the human scent trail, guiding them to an area richer in game, far from the herds and children. As she worked, the image of the young hunters with their skeptical glances silently challenged her. They relied on brute strength, speed, and aim. Lena relied on the wisdom of the land, on patience and on instinct. True strength, she thought, was not in dominating nature, but in dancing with it, respecting its rhythms, and using its secrets. Every fiber of her aged being resonated with this ancestral truth. She was an elder, yes, but she was also the personification of centuries of knowledge, of survivors who whispered to the wind and read the stars. Her movements were slow, but full of unwavering purpose. Every branch and stone was a link in her risky plan. The pale Yakutian sun was setting, dyeing the sky purple and orange, the temperature plummeting. Lena knew that night would bring greater danger, but also opportunity. In the darkness, her paths would be more effective, the horde more susceptible to confusion. She stood up, stretching her aching back, and looked at the path she had traced. A smile of determination lit her wrinkled face. The fight was just beginning, but Lena, the guardian of the village, was ready. The promise of a tomorrow for her people was the engine of her unwavering resilience. The promise of a tomorrow for her people was the engine of her unwavering resilience. As the last ray of sun bid farewell, painting the Yakutian sky in shades of violet and lead grey, Lena felt the cold intensify brutally, biting at exposed skin and penetrating her thickest fur clothes. The encroaching darkness brought not only the danger of invisible predators, but also a unique opportunity. In the gloom, the sharp senses of the 900 leopards would be more easily deceived. Her paths of subtle scents and diversions would gain strength, transforming into an olfactory labyrinth almost imperceptible to human eyes, but infinitely confusing for the hungry beasts. With a sigh that transformed into dense and fleeting vapor, Lena adjusted the rifle on her shoulder, feeling the icy metal against her skin, and began to move again, now with a silent urgency. She knew she needed to cover a larger area, extending the web of her invisible traps as far as possible. Her eyes, accustomed to the gloom of the tundra, tirelessly sought strategic points. A crevice in the rock to hide a handful of aromatic herbs she carried in her leather pouch. A twisted bush where she could tie a small piece of hair fur, impregnated with a scent different from the village's human trail. Every gesture was precise, every choice, the fruit of decades of attentive observation and respectful coexistence with the wild nature of Yakutia. The leopard horde, which had once been a dark and distant smudge on the horizon, now seemed dangerously closer. Lena could hear the muffled sounds of their movements on the compacted snow, a low growl here, a subtle scratch there, the snapping of dry branches under heavy paws. Her heart beat with a constant, strong rhythm, an ancestral drumbeat that echoed the unwavering strength of her people. She could not afford to hesitate, not for a second. The image of the hungry faces in the village, of the children with their large eyes full of an almost desperate hope, was a fire that burned in her chest, stronger than the most intense cold of 71 degrees below zero. She crouched near a small frozen stream where the wind, with its incessant dance, created whirls of fine snow. With extreme care, she broke the thin ice and scattered birch bark powder she had prepared in advance, mixed with a little blood from a small rodent she had hunted earlier. The scent, almost imperceptible to humans, would be an irresistible invitation to the leopards, a tempting and crucial diversion away from the path leading to the village. Lena knew that hunger made them reckless, and this recklessness would be her most valuable ally. Her fingers, though aged and time-worn, worked with surprising dexterity, manipulating the elements of the tundra like an artist shapes their most precious work. She was not fighting nature in a direct confrontation, but rather working in harmony with it, using its own rules to her advantage. The young hunters, with their modern weapons and their faith in brute force, might scoff at her ancestral methods. But Lena knew that the true battle was not fought with gunpowder alone, but with intelligence, patience, and a deep respect for life. As night deepened, the temperature dropped even further, reaching levels that would make anyone give up, freezing soul and body. But Lena was not just anyone. She was the Elder, the guardian of millennial knowledge, the living personification of Yakutian resilience. She rose, feeling her body protest with every movement, her muscles aching and joints creaking under the effort, but her mind remained sharp as an ice knife. She looked at the trail of diversion she had created, a masterpiece of deception and hope. The horde was approaching, and the game of cat and mouse, or rather of elder and leopards, was about to truly begin. A small smile of defiance lit her wrinkled face, a silent promise of victory. Let the night come. She was ready to face whatever came, driven by an unwavering love for her people and the promise of a new dawn. The promise of a tomorrow for her people was the engine of her unwavering resilience. As night swallowed the tundra, transforming it into a cloak of shadows and icy whispers, Lena felt the presence of the leopard horde intensify. It wasn't just the distant sound, but a subtle vibration in the air, an omen her old bones recognized. The cold was a constant adversary, but her mind was ablaze, tracing and retracing the invisible paths she had woven. She moved with the caution of a snow spirit, each step calculated not to leave tracks that could be easily followed. Her eyes, accustomed to the darkness, swept the horizon, searching for any sign that her plan was working. Suddenly, a sound broke the deadly silence of the night, a sharp growl followed by a frantic scratching in the snow. Lena hid behind an ice-covered rock, her heart pounding in her chest. It wasn't a growl of a successful hunt, but of confusion, of frustration. She carefully peeked out. A small group of leopards, perhaps 20, had strayed from the main body of the horde. They were frantically sniffing at one of the spots where Lena had scattered the aromatic herbs and birch bark powder, far from the village path. Their movements were erratic, their heads low, clearly disoriented by the unusual scent that led them away from the most direct trail. A small, almost imperceptible smile of triumph touched Lena's wrinkled lips. It worked. The first subtle trap had served its purpose. It wasn't a complete victory, but it was a start, a sign that her ancestral wisdom could, in fact, deceive the brute force and hungry instinct of 900 beasts. The disbelief of the young hunters, which echoed in her memory, began to dissipate, replaced by a silent and powerful certainty. The tundra, her old friend, was on her side. Lena watched the group of leopards for a few more minutes, ensuring they continued to follow the false trail. Then, with renewed energy, she moved away, delving deeper into the darkness, towards an area she knew well. It was a natural depression in the terrain, protected by rock formations and dense dwarf birch bushes, a place that the strong Yakutian winds usually spared from the thickest snow. She had a premonition, an intuition forged by decades of wilderness life, that there might be something there. As she approached, the scent of pine and damp earth, unusual for that altitude and cold, grew stronger. Lena felt a shiver, not from cold, but from anticipation. With the seal oil lamp she carried, she illuminated the entrance to the depression. And there it was, a small herd of caribou, perhaps 30, huddled together for protection from the cold, completely oblivious to the threat of the leopards. They had found refuge there, and more importantly, the horde of predators, focused on its massive advance and Lena's distraction trail, had passed by, failing to notice the presence of the vital game. This was the unexpected turning point. Not only was she managing to divert the horde, but in doing so, she had discovered the food her village desperately needed. The sight of the caribou, robust and healthy, was like a ray of sunshine amidst the icy darkness. Her eyes filled with tears that froze on her eyelids before they could fall. The tundra's justice, Lena thought, was subtle and powerful. The life of her people would be saved. With her heart overflowing with deep gratitude, Lena knew her work was not yet finished. She needed to ensure that the leopards continued their path away, and that this small herd was safely led to the village. The task was immense, but hope, once an ember, was now a burning bonfire in her chest. She tightened her grip on the rifle, no longer with the weight of despair, but with the lightness of determination. Elder Lena, the guardian of life, was ready for the next phase of her epic journey. Dawn would bring not only light, but the promise of a future for her people, forged in her unwavering resilience and ancestral wisdom. Elder Lena knew that moving the caribou would require even greater subtlety than diverting the leopards. These animals, though robust, were naturally timid. Any sudden movement could scatter them, throwing them back into the path of the hungry horde. She approached the herd with the calm of a winter breeze, her steps light and silent on the snow. The caribou, with majestic antlers and watchful eyes, raised their heads in unison, some snorting, but without panic. They sensed her presence, but also a strange absence of threat. Lena murmured soft words in her ancestral tongue, a song of peace and promise, asking for their trust. Her plan was now doubly complex, to keep the 900 leopards diverted and at the same time guide the caribou along a safe path. She couldn't simply scare them away. She needed to encourage them to follow a carefully planned route, which she had already mentally mapped, taking advantage of depressions in the terrain and clusters of trees for shelter and concealment. With the old rifle on her shoulder, more a symbol of determination than a weapon, she began to move slowly in a wide arc around the herd, maintaining a respectful distance. She used the wind to her advantage, allowing her subtle scent to guide them without startling them. Every few meters, Lena stopped, observing the caribou's reaction with concentration. When the leader moved in the desired direction, she felt a pang of joy. It was a delicate dance, a silent conversation between the elder and nature, where patience was the most valuable currency. She knew the journey would be long and exhausting. Her muscles protested, her joints creaked, but the sight of the caribou, a living promise of food for her village, was a potent balm. She thought of her grandchildren's hungry faces, of the joy that would erupt in the village. This image propelled her, igniting a flame of strength in her chest. As she guided the herd with this calculated slowness, Lena continued to spread scents and plant branches, extending the web of disorientation for the leopards. She needed to ensure that the horde did not unexpectedly turn back and discover the herd. The sun began to rise on the eastern horizon, painting the sky in cool shades of pink, violet, and light blue. With the growing light came visibility. The leopards, though focused on the false trails, could see the herd's movement from a greater distance. The risk increased. Lena felt cold sweat trickle down her back, mixing with the icy air, a reminder of the fragility of life in Yakutia. Suddenly, a prolonged guttural howl echoed across the vast tundra, breaking the deadly silence of dawn. It was not a leopard. It was the lament of wolves, several of them answering each other. Lena stopped abruptly, her body tense, every sense on high alert. Wolves rarely hunted in groups as large as the leopard horde, but their presence there, so close, was a new and unexpected danger, an additional layer of complexity. They could attract the leopard's attention to the herd, or worse, attack the caribou themselves. The elder tightened her grip on the rifle, her experienced eyes sweeping the icy landscape, searching for the exact source of the sound, trying to discern the direction and number of the predators. The plan, which had seemed so perfectly orchestrated, now faced a new and unpredictable threat. Lena's resilience would be tested once more, in a battle of intelligence and instinct against the multiple dangers of Yakutia. The life of her beloved village depended on her, and she would not fail. The guttural howl of the wolves, echoing across the icy tundra, made Lena's heart clench in her chest, a knot of apprehension forming. It wasn't a casual hunting sound, but a call that seemed to come from several directions, indicating a considerable group. Her experienced eyes, accustomed to deciphering nature's most subtle signs, swept the landscape, still pale with the incipient dawn, searching for any movement among the frozen bushes or rock formations. The caribou, previously relatively calm, raised their heads in unison, their large dark eyes fixed in the direction of the howls, their bodies tense, ready for flight. Lena knew that panic could be as dangerous as the predators themselves. If the herd scattered, it would be almost impossible to gather it again, and the chance of safely leading them to the village would be lost. She crouched even lower, feeling the intense cold of the snow penetrate her clothes, but her mind was ablaze, working quickly. Wolves were a different threat from leopards. While felines were guided primarily by scent and sight for a massive hunt, wolves were strategists, working in packs, capable of surrounding and isolating their prey with remarkable intelligence. Furthermore, the scent of a wolf hunt could easily attract the attention of the 900 leopards, undoing all her diversion work. It was like balancing on a tightrope over an icy abyss. Lena pulled a small leather pouch from her bag, containing a mixture of campfire ashes and dried wild pepper, a natural repellent her grandmother had taught her to use against smaller predators. With precise and rapid movements, she began to spread the powder around the perimeter where the caribou were grouped, creating an olfactory barrier. It wasn't to harm, but to bother, to send a signal that this place was not easy or safe for a hunt. As she worked, her lips murmured silent prayers to the spirits of the tundra, asking for protection and wisdom. The howls grew closer, and Lena could discern the rustle of paws in the snow. She turned, raising her rifle not to shoot, but to use it as a support, an extension of her own presence. With her other hand, she picked up a dry branch and repeatedly struck it against an exposed rock, creating a dry, strident sound that echoed in the thin air. It was an unusual, unnatural sound, designed to disturb and alert, to simulate an unknown and unpredictable threat. The caribou huddled even closer, but did not flee. They felt the unwavering determination of the elder, a silent force that calmed them. Suddenly, a large wolf with grey fur and cunning eyes emerged from behind a cluster of bushes. About 50 meters away, it stopped, sniffing the air, its head raised, its eyes fixed on Lena. 2 other wolves appeared right behind it. The pack was smaller than the leopard horde, but no less dangerous. The alpha wolf let out a low growl, a warning but also a question. Lena did not back down. Her eyes, though wrinkled by time, shone with an intensity that rivaled the predator's. She struck the branch against the rock again, with more force, and let out a sharp cry, a sound that came from the depths of her soul, a cry of defiance and protection. The wolf hesitated. The scent of pepper, the strange sound, and the imposing figure of the elder, who showed no fear, were a combination that did not fit their hunting patterns. They were accustomed to prey that fled, not to a small woman who faced them with such fierce courage. Lena felt cold sweat trickle down her forehead, but she maintained her firm posture, rifle raised, branch in hand. It was a battle of wills, and she could not afford to lose. The life of her village, the hope of a future, depended on that moment. The wolves looked at each other, confused. The leader, after a moment of indecision, let out a final growl of frustration and, turning, disappeared into the dawn mist, followed by the others. Lena watched until she was sure they were gone. A deep sigh escaped her lips, transforming into vapor. The tension in her shoulders eased, but vigilance remained. She had won another battle, not with brute force, but with cunning and the wisdom of one who knows the tundra's secrets. The caribou slowly began to relax. Elder Lena, the guardian of life, had once again proven her unwavering resilience. The path to the village was still long, but hope now was brighter than the rising sun. The wolves were gone, leaving behind only a scent trail and the tension in the air. Lena, with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of the entire night, watched the caribou. Slowly, the animals began to lower their heads, chewing on the snow and small bushes they could reach, but their eyes still moved, vigilant. The elder knew that the danger, though momentarily averted, had not vanished. The horde of 900 leopards still lurked, and the sun, now rising higher, cast a clearer light on the tundra, making any movement more visible. She needed to regain control, but even more gently. Rushing the caribou now would be a fatal mistake. With slow and deliberate movements, Lena moved a little away from the herd, choosing a path that wound between low hills and rock formations, offering some cover. She continued to scatter the small pieces of fur and herbs she carried, reinforcing the diversion trail for the leopards, ensuring that the caribou scent remained masked and that the predator's trail led them away. Her fingers, though aching from the cold and effort, worked with the precision of delicate embroidery, every fiber of her wrinkled skin feeling the texture of the snow and ice. The Yakutian sun, even in its morning splendor, was pale and brought no warmth. The temperature continued to challenge the limits of endurance, and Lena felt weariness settle deep into her bones. Every step was a small battle against exhaustion, but the image of her village's hungry faces was a shield against discouragement. She saw the children, the elders, the young hunters who, despite their initial disbelief, now depended on her. This responsibility was a heavy burden, but also an inexhaustible source of strength. As she guided the herd, Lena kept her ears alert, catching the distant sounds of the tundra. The wind, her constant companion, brought with it whispers of danger. She could feel the presence of the leopards, no longer as a close growl, but as a pressure in the air, an awareness that they were there, moving, perhaps still confused, but always hungry. With each hill the herd traversed, each valley they crossed, the elder looked back to the flanks, to the horizon, searching for any sign that the horde had strayed, or worse, was approaching. There was a moment when Lena felt a shiver run down her spine. From atop a small elevation she saw in the distance a dark, moving smudge. It was the horde, or part of it, winding across the tundra, but, to her relief, they were moving in a direction that led away from the village, following the distraction trail she had created. Lena's heart leapt with relief, but the tension did not abandon her. At any moment, an unexpected wind, a stronger scent, or the simple perception that they were being deceived could make them change course. She tightened her grip on the rifle, feeling the familiar weight of the metal. It was not to hunt the caribou now. It was to protect the herd, protect her village. The journey was long, and with each passing hour, the elder felt the fragility of her own existence. But the ancestral wisdom, the deep connection to the land, and the unwavering strength of spirit that propelled her were more powerful than any cold or weariness. She was the guardian, the bridge between the past and the future of her people, and she would not fail. With a nod to herself, a gesture of renewed determination, Lena continued to guide the caribou, step by step, across the icy landscape. The sun was now higher, and the light revealed the relentless vastness of Yakutia, but also the austere beauty of its resilience. The village was closer, but the path was still fraught with invisible dangers and monumental challenges. Elder Lena knew that true victory was not just finding the food, but bringing it home through all adversities, and she would do it. Elder Lena knew that true victory was not just finding the food, but bringing it home through all adversities, and she would do it. With this conviction etched into every fiber of her being, she continued to guide the caribou, her steps slow and calculated, each one echoing the promise of life for her village. The sun, now a pale smudge in the grey sky, offered little light and no warmth, but revealed the relentless vastness of the tundra, where every shadow could hide a danger. Lena felt the weight of time on her shoulders, exhaustion gnawing at her strength, but the image of her grandchildren's hungry faces was a balm for her weary soul. Suddenly, a movement on the horizon. Not the indistinct mass of the main horde, but a smaller, faster group that had broken off. About 20 leopards, perhaps more, with their slender bodies and hungry eyes, seemed to have sniffed out something different. Or perhaps the persistence of their instinct had led them to distrust the diversion trail. They were moving with frightening speed, directly towards the caribou herd. Lena's heart leapt, a frantic drumming against her ribs. The caribou, sensing the new threat, began to snort and stir, their antlers intertwining in growing panic. The elder knew there was no time for subtle maneuvers. It was time for the final confrontation. Her mind, sharp as an ice blade, scoured the memories of her life on the tundra, searching for a solution, a last stratagem. Her eyes swept the terrain and landed on a peculiar rock formation, a kind of natural amphitheater carved by wind and ice, with a deep crevice at its base. It was a place the ancient Yakutians used to amplify sounds, to communicate over long distances, or to frighten away large predators. With a nod to herself, a gesture of renewed determination, Lena ran, ignoring the pain in her legs, towards the crevice. The leopards were less than 100 meters away, their low growls already perceptible, their heavy steps in the snow. The caribou, in despair, began to scatter. Lena knew she had to act now. She squeezed into the crevice, the tight and icy space, and with all the strength she had left, she raised her rifle and struck it against the wall of ice and rock. The sound that followed was not just the impact of metal, but a deafening roar, amplified and distorted by the natural formation, echoing across the tundra like the roar of a gigantic and furious creature. Simultaneously, she lit her seal oil lamp and swung it frantically, creating flashes of light that danced on the ice walls, casting ghostly shadows. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. The leopards, caught by surprise by that supernatural sound and erratic light, stopped abruptly. Their eyes, accustomed to the darkness and silence of the hunt, widened in confusion and fear. They did not understand the origin of that threat, only that it was something powerful and unknown that defied their predatory instincts. The group leader let out a frightened yowl, a sharp sound different from their usual growls, and retreated, followed by the others. They turned, their bodies tense, and ran back towards the main horde, as if fleeing a tundra ghost. Lena watched, panting, as the last dark specks disappeared into the distance. Silence returned, heavy and dense, broken only by the panting breath of the caribou, who, though still startled, had stopped fleeing. The elder felt her legs give way, and she fell to her knees in the snow, the rifle slipping from her hands. A wave of relief, as intense as the cold, washed over her, mixed with an exhaustion that seemed to drain the very life from her body. She had succeeded. She had dispersed the most immediate threat, and the caribou was safe. The climax of her journey had been overcome, not with violence, but with ancestral wisdom and unwavering courage that defied her age. The village would be saved. Elder Lena felt the icy snow beneath her knees. Relief, stronger than the cold, flooded her body. The rifle lay beside her. Her lungs burned, her body cried for rest, but her tired eyes shone with satisfaction. The caribou, still tense, calmed down, grouping around her, seeking solace. The pale sun illuminated the tundra. The danger of the leopards, though dispersed, had not vanished. The main horde still lurked, but the immediate threat had been averted. Lena, with effort, rose, her legs trembling. She picked up the rifle, feeling the familiar weight. With unwavering determination, she began to guide the herd, tracing a slow and safe path home. Her eyes read the snow, searching for firm passages, avoiding traps. She murmured ancestral songs of resilience. The journey back was a final test of her inner strength. Weariness was a dense fog, but the image of the village, of her hungry grandchildren, was her shield. Every step was a prayer, every breath an act of faith. She was not just guiding animals. She carried the future of her people. Hours dragged on under the weakening sun, painting the sky in twilight hues. Then Lena saw. In the distance, faint smoke rose into the icy air, the unmistakable sign of the village fires. A lump formed in her throat. Warm tears streamed down, freezing. She had succeeded. As they approached, the silhouettes of huts and tents outlined themselves. Dogs barked in a chorus of welcome. Doors opened and, curious, then shocked, figures emerged. The first to see her were the young hunters, those who had doubted. Their faces, once disbelieving, now twisted in genuine astonishment and reverence. Lena continued to advance, her eyes fixed on the village. She saw her granddaughter, Anya, running towards her, arms open, pure and unhindered joy on her face. The elder barely held her rifle before Anya hugged her tightly, the girl's tears wetting her shoulder. Other villagers approached, some crying with relief, others in silence, just watching the elder and the herd of caribou that faithfully followed her. Elder Semyon, the most skeptical, walked up to her, eyes glistening with tears. He said not a word, just took Lena's wrinkled hand and squeezed it tightly, a gesture worth more than 1,000 apologies. The caribou were guided into temporary corrals. The village, once plunged into the darkness of hunger, was filled with the buzz of hope and gratitude. Bonfires were rekindled with more vigor, and the smell of fresh meat began to spread, an aroma that promised an end to scarcity and the warmth of survival. Lena, sitting near a crackling bonfire with Anya nestled beside her, watched the scene, her heart overflowing with peace. She had resolved the main conflict. The village was saved, not by brute force, but by ancestral wisdom, unwavering courage, and deep love for her people. True strength, she knew, resided in the resilience of the human spirit. Lena, sitting near a crackling bonfire, with Anya nestled beside her, watched the scene, her heart overflowing with peace. She had resolved the main conflict. The village was saved, not by brute force, but by ancestral wisdom, unwavering courage, and deep love for her people. True strength, she knew, resided in the resilience of the human spirit. The fire's warmth danced on her wrinkled face, illuminating the marks of a lifetime of challenges and triumphs. Anya, her head resting on her grandmother's shoulder, breathed softly, a heavy sleep of relief and security. Lena stroked the girl's hair, feeling its softness beneath her calloused fingers. It was for her, for all of them, that she had faced the tundra and the predators. Night advanced, and the improvised feast was in full swing. The smell of roasted meat, which had not filled the village air for so long, was an invitation to life, a balm for hungry souls. The villagers, once pale and silent, now laughed and conversed, their voices filled with a contained yet profound joy. The young hunters, who had once doubted Lena's capabilities, now looked at her with a respect that transcended admiration. They approached the bonfire one by one to offer her pieces of the best meat, their eyes lowered in a gesture of humility and gratitude. There was no need for words. The respectful silence and sincere glances spoke louder than any speech. They had witnessed wisdom in action, courage that did not bend before the impossible. Semyon, the elder who had previously expressed his disbelief, sat opposite Lena, his face bathed in the flickering light. He reached out and, with a sad and sincere smile, served her a bowl of warm herbal tea. "Lena," he said, his voice hoarse with emotion, "you have taught us a lesson we will never forget. True strength lies not just in young muscles, but in a heart that knows the land and a spirit that refuses to yield. We were wrong to doubt you." Lena merely nodded, her eyes fixed on the flames. She sought no praise, only the certainty that her village would be safe. In the days that followed, the village flourished. The caribou meat ensured food for all, and the furs were used to repair clothes and tents, offering protection against the relentless cold. But more than food and warmth, Lena had brought back hope. Trust in ancestral wisdom, which seemed to have been lost among the younger ones, was restored. The stories of her journey across the tundra, of the confrontation with the leopards and wolves, and of her cunning to guide the caribou would be told for generations. A reminder that human resilience is the greatest inheritance. Anya now followed her grandmother everywhere, her eyes shining with a new understanding and an even deeper love. She listened attentively to Lena's every word, every teaching about plants, animals, the secrets of ice and wind. The elder, in turn, saw in her granddaughter the continuation of her legacy, the flame of wisdom that would pass from one generation to the next. She was not just a survivor, she was a guardian, a bridge between the past and the future. Life in Yakutia continued to be a constant struggle against relentless nature. But Lena's village had found new strength, an unwavering unity. They learned that even in the most extreme conditions, compassion, courage, and ancestral wisdom could overcome any adversity. Lena's story was not just about the hunt. It was about the human spirit's capacity to rise, to protect, to love, and to find light even in the deepest darkness. And so, under the vast and starry Yakutian sky, Elder Lena, with peace in her heart and renewed hope in her village, found her true rest, knowing that she had fulfilled her purpose, and that winter, however merciless, would never extinguish the flame of life in her people. Winter, however merciless, would never extinguish the flame of life in her people. And so it was. Weeks turned into months, and Yakutia's vast white mantle slowly began to yield to the first signs of a timid spring, bringing not only the thaw, but a new phase in the village's life. Elder Lena's physical absence was a palpable silence, an empty space beside the main bonfire that no one dared to fill. Yet her spirit, her words, and her unwavering courage persisted in every corner, in every heart. Anya, now with more mature eyes and a firmer posture, took on a role that seemed to have been tailored for her by Lena herself. She was no longer just the curious granddaughter. She was the guardian of stories, the voice that recalled her grandmother's teachings in moments of doubt. When the young hunters encountered an uncertain trail or unpredictable weather, Anya, with wisdom echoing in her mind, repeated Lena's words. The earth speaks, one must know how to listen. The wind whispers, one must feel its direction. Her gestures were exact copies of her grandmother's. The way she pointed to the sky, how she touched the snow to feel the depth of the ice. Semyon, the elder who had once doubted, became the most fervent defender of Lena's legacy. He spent hours with Anya, narrating and recounting the elder's exploits, ensuring that every detail, every lesson of resilience was etched into the memory of the younger ones. His eyes, once filled with skepticism, now shone with deep reverence, a gratitude that had transformed him. He understood that true strength resided not in impetuous youth, but in patience, observation, and connection to ancestral roots. The village, revitalized by the abundance of game and the hope Lena had brought, flourished in a new way. The bonfires crackled with more joy, the children's laughter echoed louder. It was not just physical survival that had been ensured, but the soul of the community that had been healed and strengthened. The villagers, once isolated in their concerns, now worked together, sharing food, tasks, and above all, stories. Human connection forged in adversity became the foundation of their new existence. One day, when the river began to thaw, revealing its dangerous floating ice blocks, a group of young hunters found themselves in a dilemma. They needed to cross to reach a promising hunting ground, but the risk was great. Anxiety gripped them. It was Anya who approached. Her eyes fixed on the current, she remembered Lena, observing the flow of the water, feeling the rhythm of the ice. Grandmother used to say the river has a heart. Anya spoke, her voice calm and clear. It calms before showing the safest path. Wait, feel its pulse. They waited. They watched. And, as if by a miracle, or perhaps by the wisdom Lena had passed down, a more stable ice path revealed itself. The crossing was made with caution, but without incident. Upon reaching the other side, the young hunters looked back at Anya and then at the vast horizon where Lena's spirit seemed to hover. They had overcome another obstacle, not by brute force, but by patience and attentive listening, exactly as the elder would have done. Life in Yakutia continued to be a dance with nature, a constant challenge, but Lena's village, now more united and wise, faced each new day with unwavering resilience. The flame the elder had ignited in their hearts would never be extinguished. She had proven that true strength resides in the wisdom that is passed down, the courage that inspires, and the love that connects generations, ensuring that, even in the face of the most overwhelming adversity, life would always find a way.